Hello guys, welcome back. So in the previous video we learned up to protozoan diseases up to malaria. So in this video we'll be learning about the life cycle of Plasmodium, which is very important. So I just thought maybe if I put it in a separate video and explain you guys clearly, it will be really good for you to understand and also write it properly. So let's get started. Let us just learn about this life cycle of Plasmodium. So in my previous video I told you that we have several types of this Plasmodium species that causes different types of malaria. Again, depending upon the species that it caused this malaria, the erythrocytic cycle also varies, right? So generally the life cycle of Plasmodium involves three stages, which is schizogony, gamogony and sporogony. Recall that in my previous video I told you the primary vector as well as primary host for this Plasmodium species is this Anopheles mosquito, right? Remember? Yeah. So when an infected mosquito bites a human, what happens? It releases the sporocytes. How does it release the sporocytes? Actually, the sporocytes will be present in the guts of this mosquito. And what happens when a mosquito bites a human? Generally, when you talk about this mosquito, all the mosquitoes are vegetarian, which means they don't consume blood. Most of the mosquitoes, but a female Anopheles mosquito, when it is about to lay the eggs, it needs lot and lot of nutrition. So human blood contains a lot of nutrition. It is a good source for the nutrition. So they just come and bite it when they are about to lay the eggs. So what happens? This Anopheles mosquito, when it bites, during that time it releases the saliva to prevent the blood from clotting. So as I told you, these sporocytes will be present inside the guts of this mosquito. When it releases the saliva, because it has to prevent the blood being clotting, right? So that it can take more amount of blood. What happens? While it releases the saliva also contains the sporocytes. So the sporocytes also is released into the bloodstream. So the sporocytes slowly moves towards the hepatic cells of the liver. As soon as it migrate and travel to the hepatic cells of the liver, it undergoes an asexual reproduction, which is called schizogony. Recall, I told you this life cycle of Plasmodium has three stages of life cycle. So the first one has already started. So as soon as it releases the sporocytes, it travels through the bloodstream and reaches the liver. There it undergoes this asexual reproduction, which is otherwise known as schizogony, and it slowly transform into merozyte. So it takes little time and transform into merozyte, and what this merozyte will again travel out of this liver and change and go and hide into the blood cells, because when a foreign antigen or foreign cell is being released in your bloodstream, our white blood cells will attack. So to avoid as well as to escape from the attack, what happens? This merocytes will slowly enters into the bloods and red blood cells and hide inside it. So once it hides inside the red blood cells, what happens? It will slowly develop, and it will slowly develop and grow and push the cytoplasm on the sides of the red blood cell, right? And it enters into the signet ring shape, which is otherwise known as S phase. We can call it as S phase. So in here what happens, the merocyte has already slowly developed into trypocyte, and it was slowly pushing the cytoplasm outside towards the sides of the red blood cell and grows big and enter into the signet ring stage. So what happens here again? It divides and produce many this merozoites that looks like a schiphner granules, which is usually in yellowish or brown in color. So it looks like a granule. When you observe it, it looks like a granule. So that is why we call them as schiphner. granules. So this then finally what happens, it reaches into erythrocyte lysis. So during this process, as soon as this merocyte insert, it will be mononucleated, and when the genetic material, when it slowly grows and enters into this signet ring stage, it developed and multiply and produce more number of this schiphenogranules or merocytes. So these merocytes, as I told you, once it has grown, multiplied into multiple tropocytes, what happens? They will slowly changed into merocytes, and finally it reaches to a stage where the red blood cell will rupture. So once the red blood cell ruptures, what happens? That process is called erythrocyte lysis. So remember, I'll explain you guys one more time again. So it just ruptures, and this process is called erythrocyte lysis. So again, this erythrocyte lysis, what happens? During this erythrocyte lysis, the merocytes will be released. Along with that, it also releases the hemozoin toxin, which will again go and affect other red blood cells. So this cycle again will continue. So it takes for every 48 to 72 hours, this cycle repeats itself. So a person who is affected by this parasite, what happens? He will experience symptoms after a few weeks. So since it takes lot and lot of time, and lot of cycles takes place, right? And what happens after it continuously the cycle goes on, and it enters into it occasionally into different stages, which is called macrogametocytes or microgametocytes. In simple, we can say male and female gametes of this Plasmodium species. So again, when a mosquito comes and bites an infected person, this macro and micro gametocytes will enter into the mosquito's gut and it slowly then it undergoes a diploid stage, which means it undergoes sexual reproduction and change into diploid cell or zygote, and finally it will change into work intake. So this work intake again, it will slowly move and develop into oocyte, and it also undergoes meiosis process, and finally in order to, because it just the blood, when as soon as it sucks the blood, so what happens, it goes inside its stomach, right? Because inside the stomach digestion process will takes place. So here sexual reproduction takes place with the help of macrogametocytes and microgametocytes. So you can see here microgametocytes will change and develop into different sperm cell. Here macrogametocytes or female gametes. So they too undergo a diploid fertilization and produce zygote, and then it develop into oocyte, and oocyte slowly develop into oocyte during meiosis process. So since the blood is inside the stomach, if it stays for the long time, it will be digested. So the oocyte will release the sporocytes. The sporocyte will slowly move to the salivary glands of the mosquito. Again, the sporocytes will then be released when it goes again and bites on another human. So this is how the cycle continues. So you can clearly see here. So the life cycle of Plasmodium has only three stages. When an infected mosquito, which means it just inject and produce saliva to prevent the blood from being clotting. So this or when it releases the saliva, as I told you, this saliva from here you can see the sporocytes have moved to the salivary glands, right? So along with the saliva, the sporocytes also will be released into the bloodstream, and it will slowly move to the liver, and where it will undergo a first stage, which is schizogony, asexual reproduction, and again it develop into merocyte, and it develop and produce multiple merocyte. Then they will be released, or they will be moving out of from the liver cell, and to hide from the white blood cells, they enters into the red blood cells, and change into trypocytes. Slowly they will grow inside the red blood cell and enter into the signet ring shape, which will be which is a mononucleated trypocyte, and then it undergoes multiple division and produce lot and lot of schizones. So they look like as granules, which is otherwise known as schiphernous granules, and which is usually yellowish or brownish in color. So when it is ready, what happens, the when it multiplies too much, what happens, the red blood cell will rupture. So that process, what we call it as erythrocyte lysis. So when the cell is about to rupture, along with the merocyte, it also releases the humozoin toxin and merozoite that again goes and affect or infect other red blood cells. The cycle takes place for every 48 to 72 hours like this. And again, occasionally what happens, this merocytes will change into different two gametocytes, which is macro macro gametocytes here, female, and micro gametocytes. So this, when a mosquito goes and bite the human who's affected by this Plasmodium species, it will enter into the mosquito's gut wall, and it goes into the intestine. There it undergoes sexual reproduction and produce oocyte. From the oocyte, different stages are there, right? So from the oocyte, it develops into sporocyte. Once the sporocyte is released, it moves to the salivary gland. Again the cycle continues. So the final stage where it releases the sporocyte is called sporogony. So you can see here it has three stages. Schizogony, the initial stage as soon as it bites the human. Then we have gamogony or gametocyte, where it changes into different gametes. Then finally it enters into the sporogony. So, how this malarial disease persists in the human body? So, the incubation period is about 12 days. Again, the effect and also the erythrocytic cycle, and it all depends upon the different species of the Plasmodium. So it doesn't affect only the red blood cells, which is otherwise called erythrocytes, remember? So it also affects spleen and other internal organs of the human body. And with the symptoms, after maybe a few weeks or after 12 days after incubation period, the person will experience severe headache, nausea, muscular pain. So since it releases neurocytes during the cell rupture, remember erythrocyte lysis, during that time what happens, it releases hemozoin along with the hemozoin toxin along with the merocytes. So this process is called malarial paroxysm, because it releases again these merocytes and hemozoin toxin to affect the other red blood cells. So, said due to malarial paroxysm, what happens? The person might experience chills and high fever and sweating. So, because of that, what happens? It will lead to high fever. So, this will induce macrophages. Macrophages are nothing but our protecting cells, which is very essential for the survival as well as proliferation of the human body cells. So these macrophages protect the organisms, which is also involved in the immunity. So since due to this malarial paroxysms, because the person is experiencing severe fever and sweating, and because of that, it induces the specialized macrophage cells to release this necrosis factor, tumor necrosis factor, and interleukin. So don't worry, it's nothing but since a person is affected, so this specialized cells will go and attack there, and it will lead to inflammation of the either the part of the body or the internal organ. So that is what we call the tumor necrosis factor, because it will proliferate, it will make and it will produce more number of macrophages to fight and combat, and also it triggers our immunity. Okay. So, how can we prevent ourselves being affected by the malaria? We can do first by breaking the transmission cycle by killing the insect vector. As I told you, the Anaphylaxis mosquito is the primary host as well as primary vector for spreading this disease. And we can use oil spray to prevent the breathing of the mosquito, because the mosquito larvae, as I told you, all must be aware that the mosquito will lay its eggs on the water, right? So as soon as it lays eggs, the eggs will develop and convert into larva. So the larva, though it present into the water, it needs oxygen to survive. So it comes on the surface and breathe and goes down. So when you spray oil on the top of the water, it prevents the enter of the oxygen, at the same time prevent the breathing of this mosquito larvae. And we can use a lot of fishes as predators, so that it goes and feed upon this larvae. So it just eradicate the Anopheles mosquito from the very beginning. And we can also use um, uh, uh, this antibiotic Bacillus thuringiensis. We can spray into that mosquito larvae so that it kills it. And also we can use nets on the windows so that it prevents the entry of the mosquito. And in 1950, WHO eradication program was initiated to prevent the spread of this disease, but it was failed due to the resistance exhibited by the Plasmodium species for the drugs that they used at the same time, DDT and other insecticide. So that's all, guys. I hope you guys understood. If you still have any doubts, you can contact me.